At the turn of the 20th century, Minnesota's entrenched Republican Party was challenged by the most successful radical third party in American history. From 1918 to 1944, the Farmer Labor Party was strong enough to wrest control of the state's government, away from the established political parties, forever transforming Minnesota's political climate.
The Midwest had a one-party system because so many of these states were brought into the Union as Republican states, and that initial development of their parties meant that it was hard for any kind of other competition to grow up. And the Democratic Party basically had its stronghold in New York City and in northeastern cities and in the South. And the rest of the country was a Republican stronghold. In a one-party system, voters, curiously, are not very loyal to the one party. There's something about competition that makes for partisan identification. And the lack of competition, of party competition, and the fact that the Republican Party didn't have to fight to build an electorate, meant that a large number of voters really were ready there for being picked up by people who wanted to start protest organizations, because these people weren't particularly loyal to the Republican Party. States are laboratories of democracy. That is to say that one of the great things about American federalism is that you can have experiments, policy experiments, and political experiments, and organizational experiments. So there's a kind of dynamism and innovation that's built into American politics. And for me, that was really what was so fascinating about the Farmer Labor Party, was it showed the possibility for dynamism and innovation that American federalism makes possible. Farming is a very insecure business. So that insecurity was something that farmers in the 19th century and in the 20th century until the 1930s were hoping to politically fix somehow. Workers didn't have protections. They didn't have protections for hours, and more important, they couldn't organize. They would get stomped on if they organized. So farmers were insecure, workers were insecure in terms of their organizational rights, or so it seemed to people, because they were distant from banks and from cities and from what seemed to be the centers of financial and economic powers. So they seemed to be essentially at the mercy of other people making big decisions about their lives. That created a context that was very favorable in Minnesota. Between the strength of the socialist trade unions and suddenly the emergence and the setting up of shop in St. Paul of the Nonpartisan League, and then their organization out in the rural areas of Minnesota, the two basic kinds of economic insecurity created the potential for a coalition in the 1920s and the 1930s. If you were an aspiring politician, there were only two places you wanted to go. You wanted to become a Republican, or you wanted to become a farmer laborite. There was a very talented socialist trade unionist who's completely obscure today, but was actually very important in the development of the Farmer Labor Party, a guy named William Mahoney. He was a person who threw himself into this idea that we ought to have an organization that would function between elections to keep the discussion going about what they're all about, and to focus on how we're going to get good candidates to run for the different positions. Then in the 30s, it really takes off as a third party, and it's really the most successful state-level third party we've ever had. And it's, in that sense, a unique political organization. And that's a going concern until 1938, when Harold Stassen takes over all the reasonable sections of the platform and just says, if you get me, you'll get a reasonable Republican who just happens to believe everything the farmer laborites have stood for. But the party limped along. And then in 1944, decided that, yep, we're going to go and we'll move into the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party said, you come on over, we want you, because we're trying to build ourselves. The Democratic Party is now the new party. It's the strong party. And we want to bootstrap ourselves into getting the kind of strength in the electorate that Democratic parties are getting everywhere else. The reason that we don't have state-level third parties like the Farmer Labor Party is that the New Deal was a big success, and it permanently strengthened the Democratic Party.
I recognize that the many proclamations from state capitals and from Washington, the legislation, the Treasury regulations and so forth, couched for the most part in banking and legal terms, ought to be explained for the benefit of the average citizen.
All the prestige of doing good things in American politics moved over to the Democratic Party. And so it's just very hard to start a plausible third-party organization. The Minnesota Farmer Labor Party's success, failure, it fails because it's not around, right? So we don't have farmer labor politicians. Success, it's a success in the sense that it created a political tradition, and it's encoded in the name of the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. And to that extent, voters every election get reminded that they have a political tradition here in Minnesota that is right there on the ballot in front of them. It created politicians who were more open-minded, I think, about social policy, and certainly much more open to organized labor than Democratic Party politicians elsewhere in the country. Politicians who were heirs to the kind of progressivism that the Farmer Labor Party tried to institutionalize and make permanent.
Prairie Mosaic is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008, the North Dakota Council on the Arts, and by the members of Prairie Public.